Look, just as a heads up, I was planning on making this video for a minute, but I guess it's more important, less important, differently important now. TikTok was here, it's gone, it came back, and it came back courting some strange men this time. It went to spring break a nice Christian, and it came back dating James Franco and box braids. There's a lot we could say about TikTok and the kind of cultural mess that it's made. We found out how absolutely tech illiterate the people that are in charge of making policy are. How this is just kind of Red Scare 2.0. The ways that folks like Meta have lobbied so hard to get TikTok banned actually shows something very true and revealing about American capitalism. Look, we ain't got time for all that. This is Country Music Comrades, so we're going to talk about what we know, which is what it means to be a working musician. Specifically, what we find out about the working conditions of musicians and the ways that they have to navigate social media platforms and tech companies as part of our job. So kind of from the jump, I think it's important to say that when we're talking about musicians using social media platforms and just kind of engaging with the tech world online in general, we're often not talking about being consumers of these social media platforms. We're talking about being producers. There's a big difference, right? Most people out there are probably using social media to just like keep up with family and friends, kind of enjoy some social engagement, find things that they're going to buy, find out about social events, things like that. For musicians, on the other hand, we're engaging social media as creators, as content creators, as people who have things to promote, as people who are trying to make a career, and part of our career, unfortunately, has to happen on the online marketplace. All right, just imagine with me for a minute that you're just a dummy with a guitar, some post-religious angst, and your only career goal is to find a job where you can drink hot beers out of the trunk of a car with your buddies in at least 15 major gas station franchises along Interstate 10. Now, you know that making records is expensive. You know that promoting records is expensive. You know that touring is expensive. You know that maintaining or buying new gear is expensive. You know that promoting shows is expensive. You know that paying your band is expensive. And you know that just renting enough oxygen to breathe in America is expensive in and of itself. Plus, you realize that most folks who are successful musicians have been fortunate enough through birth or luck to know folks who can bankroll their projects until they become solvent and successful. These are folks who have connections to bigwig labels. These folks that have rich parents. These are folks that have creepy patrons. These are folks that just have really good industry connections because their families all shake hands at the country club. But you don't have that. So you have to start a career the scrappy way, trying to get the most bang for your buck. So along comes the internet, Al Gore's internet, and it's supposed to be a good place for all that getting the bang for your buck. For years you've been told that all the old industry norms are being disrupted on the internet, that the music industry is being democratized online, and anyone can make music, can find their people, can build a following. All it takes is hard work and talent and consistent posting, honestly. And this is not to mention the fact that just every industry, anything from venues to labels, is going to require you to have an online presence. So you hit the road, starting up your music career. Every show that you play, you're telling folks to follow you on socials. You're busting your ass making content. You're paying people to take photos and make videos. You spend hours and hours editing videos. You learn how to do basic lighting, even though you'd rather be practicing dusting a baggy G runs. You basically take on a whole other unpaid part-time job being a content creator just so you can give your other mostly unpaid part-time job of being a musician a snowflake shot in hell. For months, you just keep uploading content faithfully like you got the fear of the Lord in you. But then you realize that all you're getting is just these little fractions of engagement that you get on your other posts that are just about your everyday life. And you also realize that every time you post anything that is promoting something that you've spent hours and hours working, you get a little notification that's telling you if you really want to get that big reach, maybe you should consider just promoting that post, throwing a little bit of money behind it. Except here's the hitch. You've already spent a bunch of money making content. You've been living off a budget sauerkraut and weenies the last 5 months just to pay off the videographer. And that $40 that Facebook is telling you to throw behind that ad just so it will get the same amount of reach as a suburban family posting pictures of their ugly kids in khakis on the beach, that $40 is also the budget you would set aside for your drummer's Zen habit. And that's the only drummer that you can afford because he's the only drummer that's agreed to work off a coffee-flavored Zen. And even though Zen Pert over there keeps on playing blast beats over Wagon Wheel, that's still the best that you can do. There's also just basic features of the other major social media platforms that are worth talking about. The first is that in order to drive traffic and engagement on a lot of these platforms, They just kind of go out there rage baiting. The more that you can kind of engage people in outrage, the more they're fighting in the comment sections, the more that they're beefing and going at each other, the more traffic there is on your site, the more that people are staying on your social media platform, the more they're messaging each other, the more data you can harvest, all of that. The other thing is that these major social media platforms tend to reward brands over people. Brands are super simple to the point of being reductive. You're never going to go on a date with a brand and be like, oh, you're so unique and complex. Brands have one thing that they have to tell you, and they don't get distracted by anything else. Brands are also super predictable. The point for a brand is to always be consistent. They will always be on message. And a brand does this in a way that also is kind of universally accessible. Even when they're selling you on the most appealing version of themselves, they're doing it in a way that is trying to capture the widest audience and not push anyone out. People, on the other hand, are very complex. We have a foot in politics, a foot in our friendships, a foot in our family history, a foot in the things that we like and we don't like, and sometimes we're just super contradictory. People are also very improvisational. We don't start our lives and live our day-to-day lives with the idea that we are going to be one thing all the time. Instead, we're always kind of putting out the next fire, and we're imagining new responses to new situations. And the other thing is that people are also just very particular. We just push some people away. Not everybody's going to like you, right? The point of being an appealing person is not necessarily to be universally appealing, but it's to just know who you are and be comfortable in that, and the people that need to find you will find you and the others won't. So in order to not be swimming up the algorithmic stream on a lot of these major social media platforms, you have to learn how to handle a lot of outrage and be exposed to a lot of outrage. And you've got to just wade on into those waters all the time. It's not particularly fun. And the second thing is you've got to behave more like a brand than a person. Your job is not to be an artist with a particular perspective. It's to be a content peddler who can bring in more users and engage more people without pushing them away. So while we're kind of doing like that 67,000 feet up, just top down big picture analysis, I just want to say some of the things that TikTok does well that has helped musicians. The first thing is that TikTok just ain't about that mess. The community guidelines say that TikTok is there to be a kind of uplifting, encouraging, educational environment. They have really strictly enforced anti-bullying and anti-harassment guidelines. That's not to say that some things don't slip through the nets, but it is pretty hard to have any longevity and any success on TikTok if you're just dead set on being an asshole. This is super important in an industry where there just isn't HR. People get harassed along the lines of identity all the time in the music industry, at music venues, at shows, online, you name it. TikTok by no means is perfect, but it is one of the only places, not just online, but period, where musicians can go, and there are consistently applied serious guide rails against harassment and bullying. The second thing is that the algorithm on TikTok doesn't drive engagement by fueling outrage and antagonism and conflict and all that kind of mess. The algorithm on TikTok tends to thrive by connecting niche interests to people who also share that niche interest. And so as a musician, you can find your musical niche. You can find people who want to hear Roger Miller meets Death Cab for Cutie meets Def Leppard. You can do that. The other thing that's great for musicians about TikTok is that sound is its own kind of property. It is its own kind of source of engagement and source of content. Sound isn't there to be just kind of a soundtrack and effect to kind of highlight and engage and heighten the visual experience. Sometimes the visual experience is even kind of secondary to the audio experience. The point is that sound drives content as much as any kind of visual or video content does. One of the other things that's really great about TikTok is that a lot of its users are just more literate in the internet. They're just more proficient at being online than a lot of other platforms. So that might be a generational thing. I don't know exactly what it is. I'm not an anthropologist of social media. By no means are the users on TikTok, all getting into MIT. By and large, my experience is that compared to X and Insta and Facebook, folks on TikTok know how to build parasocial relationships in not the worst ways. They're a little more media literate. They know how to kind of translate the discourses that they're having on social media into kind of online action. For musicians, this has meant that folks know how to engage musicians online. They understand that you can transition finding someone's music and engaging it on TikTok to following them on Spotify. That's honestly great. For me personally, I can tell you that over a year and a half of posting seriously, I doubled the number of Spotify followers I've had since I started being on Spotify in 2016. To put that in very frank terms, in a year and a half of posting consistently on a social media app, I got the same number of people to follow me on Spotify and listen to my music that I did from road dogging it for years, sleeping on sofas, eating gas station hot dogs, taking Jello shots with guys who wouldn't tip the band, but they would buy me drinks as long as I would listen to them complain about how women don't know how to drive jet skis, shaking hands with every old folkhead who looks like they just rolled out of a Grateful Dead concert so that they can complain to me about how I'm just not as good as a tragic man like Townes Van Zandt who couldn't get out of his own way. All of that. I road dogged it for years and got the same amount of return and just posting consistently on social media. And just by comparison, when I ask people on Facebook, on Insta, on X to follow me on Spotify, to do something else kind of online that helps support my music, engagement doesn't really tend to leave the platform and lead to any kind of support for me as a musician. Not anywhere near to the degree that it does on TikTok. The conversion rate is so much infinitely higher than it has been on any other platform for me. The other thing is that by showcasing people instead of brands, TikTok showcases artists in their own terms. The point on TikTok is that you get to be as complex as you are, and it kind of is like the expectation is that if you're not as complex as you are, it comes off as a little disingenuous and a little fake. And so artists get to establish the terms in which they're understood. They get to contextualize themselves. The ways that they're made legible as artists and their projects are made legible isn't just kind of punted to whatever vague messaging you're going to get from kind of genre expectations and from labels. Instead, it's how artists respond to events, how they make sense of kind of cultural moments, how they're talking about things like Palestine. Your idiosyncrasies and your perspective on TikTok are to your advantage. They're a resource to you on TikTok. They're things that fuel engagement and help you find your people. And so you're not expected as an artist to be a blank canvas. So as an artist, you don't end up just kind of being the person that's singing karaoke to your own content. You get to be the artist that is getting to represent the things that you've brought into the world. Now, at this point, you're probably thinking that I'm here just glazing up TikTok and that I am down bad for a tech company. I need to make it very clear at this point that I'm doing comparative work. I'm comparing one social media platform against its competitors. I'm not offering endorsements. I'm not with my full throat, saying I'm going to stand on business that TikTok is the perfect and whole encapsulation of what equity looks like for musicians in the marketplace. I ain't saying any of that. So I'm going to pull up this statement by the UMAW because I think that it provides some really helpful context and nuance for the ways that musicians engage tech companies and especially the kind of big social media platforms in general. I think at the end of the day, it's helpful to understand our relationship to these kinds of platforms as kind of our relationship to basically a digital strip mall. These places are there to convene public life for the sake of generating private commerce. We are there to kind of convene communities that will engage and line the pockets of the private interests that have created these spaces. For a lot of musicians, we need to understand that we're not much more than the kind of house music in the food court at the mall. We're there to make sure that people are buying drinks. We're there to make sure that people aren't itching to leave, that they're a little more comfortable and relaxed so that they can keep spending their money. But that also means that at some point, the mall's going to expect us to be customers too. And if at any point the mall decides that it doesn't help their business for us to be there, that it just isn't worth the cost, or that we're not helping business function normally, then they're going to find other ways of dealing with us and we're going to become expendable as well. So despite the ways that to be ultimately realistic about the function of these giant social media platforms, you have to ultimately be pessimistic about their function socially, there still are things that we can learn by doing comparative work, by saying if we compare TikTok to its competitors, there are things that we can see that have worked that might signal a kind of exit from the way that things are. By comparing this international app to its American counterparts, we're able to put into really sharp focus some of the cultural features and failures that these American apps have produced. Despite the ways that we find ourselves in a digital gilded age and this kind of unfolding oligopolistic tech dystopia, despite all of that, doing this kind of comparative work, it helps limit the ways that we're overwhelmed by the big picture, and it helps us focus on really concrete things that we can advocate for, things that we've seen work, things that we have seen be successful economically, commercially, socially. And so those are things that we can advocate for. And these are things that kind of signal what an exit out of this dystopia would look like as we kind of dream about building equitable digital spaces. So let's just stay for a minute with being critical of TikTok, specifically the kinds of music culture that it's created. One of my biggest critiques is that I don't think TikTok has done much to promote music literacy. It's just done a lot to encourage engagement with other artists. And there's a big difference, right? TikTok hasn't helped people refine their taste. It has just helped them find more of the things that are already to their taste. There's plenty of dog water artists that found people that like their dog water music, and these people were able to climb out of the giant primordial dog bowl onto dry land with a music career. So the worker in me is stoked for that because, hey, whatever you're doing, go make your money, get your bag, get your bread. I'm happy for you. But the part of me that cares about the craft is a little bummed because I don't think the craft has necessarily evolved because we've been on TikTok. I mean, y'all, TikTok gave us a stomp and holler revival. Like, we needed that. We were in the end game. We were the end stage death rattle of stomp and holler. And now I'm worried that, frankly, because of TikTok, stomp and holler is here to stay. Like, for good. It ain't going away. Once again, if you make stomp and holler, I don't like your music. I don't think it's good. I would love to have some conversations about how we can fix that for you. But I am so stoked that you're paying your mortgage. Genuinely, get your money. But even this change, no matter how complicated it is still a change from the ways that the music industry tends to make, where your tastemakers and the people that are kind of functioning as connectors, the people that are connecting you to your audience, are the same people. I mean, y'all, we don't have to name any names, but there are plenty of people in the music industry who don't make good music, but they do have the kind of infrastructure that will get you to like it just by virtue of the fact that they will wear you down. They built music careers off of atrophy of your taste. Sure, there's plenty of examples of people who have abused and manipulated the music culture on TikTok and the ways that that platform functions to benefit the kind of old guard of folks, right? The folks for whom the tastemakers and the connectors are the same, the folks who are the Nepo babies, the folks that got daddy's credit card and all that, and they'll kind of manufacture virality, all that. I get that. But frankly, I'd rather be in a system where it's the old guard and the folks that are vested with all kinds of capital who are the ones who are having to hustle and figure out ways to make it, instead of you and me who are the kind of scrappy folks that are trying to figure out what our shortcut's going to be because we know that we don't have the resources to take the long way there. I think part of TikTok not promoting music literacy is that it tended to reward the songs that are kind of least poetic, the things that are most obvious. It tends to reward things that I would consider to be soapboxes with a kind of musical background, and the music is there just to kind of get some hooks in your conscience and in your mouth to get you to pay attention longer while people kind of preach at you. Now, I ain't going to name anybody because, once again, I want all musicians to get their bag. I can tell you my own experience, though, that the songs that have connected people most to my music aren't the ones that I think particularly reflect a lot of craft, don't have a lot of poetic quality, but they are things that are pretty obvious about what they say. They're pretty transparent, and they can work in the kind of short attention span that people have on an app where if you don't get it immediately, you just scroll to the next video. This is the dumbest video I've ever written, and now I'm cursing your ears with it. If you don't like the government, don't talk like the government. Don't tell and run your mouth. Make them do their own work. And so sure, this compromises parts of the craft because if you're someone who makes a record and a record's supposed to be like a book and it's self-referential and it develops and it flows and it's something that you can get something new from every time that you return to it, then TikTok frankly doesn't reward that kind of slow, long listening. TikTok doesn't really reward crock pots. It rewards instant pots. The more obvious you are, the more transparent you are, the more immediately accessible you are, the more you're rewarded. That's tough. Look, there's plenty of people that are Lin-Manuel Mirandaing their way across TikTok. It's message-driven music, but not in any way that's interesting. It's not sexy. It doesn't do a service to the kind of poetic and affective aspects of the things that they're advocating for. It's just think piece musical theater is all it is. And that's fine, right? Get your bag, but the music is not the point, and the art is not the point. The point is that the music is there just to kind of sedate you and to kind of wow you enough to keep your attention while they get their point across, because people don't like reading. They like listening more. I don't know really how to explain this. The best way I can make sense of it is that people are kind of trying to mimic their raw performance off of full production vocal stylings that they like. So they try to have this kind of rawer, screamier, more pushed sound that's more affected because it's mimicking the ways that in post-production people are able to saturate and drive a vocal chain. And so it creates a very strange kind of performance. I'm not saying it's totally negative, but it is weird to me, and I don't necessarily like it, you know? All these people, it's just weird to me. It's like people are kind of half throat singing these days, but it's Don Williams songs. You know what I mean? I don't know if y'all are going to understand that without me calling out specific people and showing you examples, but I ain't going to do that because, Hey, once again, musicians got to get their bag. Like, I say all this critical stuff, and I still, at the end of the day, think this is a better deal than the alternatives. Because even if you're not going to kowtow to the things that are going to make you go fully viral on TikTok, TikTok is still going to connect you to like the 2 or 3 people a day that are going to actually buy into your music career, that are actually going to listen to your stuff on other platforms, that are actually going to follow you and engage with your music and tell other people about it. That's not something that can be said about the other platforms. You can't really build a slow, organic online base on those platforms without dumping lots and lots and lots of money into it. We know I love an overworked metaphor. Ding, 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 ding. Let's be real, y'all. Facebook is a failed state. It's a place that thrives on misinformation. It used to be a place a lot of people could kind of half make work, but now it just has no kind of societal organization to it. You can buy just about any good that you want. It's the place where they send all the refuse and trash from the internet, and it just gets circulated around. It's not great. Instagram is the suburbs. It's deliberately depoliticized. You have to opt into political content. It wants to promote photo dumps of people with their weird little families. And then it just wants to service brand deals. It's just strip malls and family values. X is just like a horny iRobot Bohemian Grove. YouTube's cool, but it's basically a library. You have to talk in hushed tones and have some concentration to be here. It's not a good place to get your feral ADHD out of your system. Look, despite all of its flaws, out of all the major platforms, TikTok is the closest thing we've got to a city. It's a place where politics and culture and hustle and neighborliness are encouraged. It's not, even the commerce that goes on over there isn't like it is over on Instagram where, you're supposed to buy something because you've learned to trust this very sanitized, branded image of an influencer. Even on TikTok, the commerce is like, hey, I got some junk and you look like you like junk. It's the person on the street corner selling you the, Prada knockoff bag, and you know exactly what you're buying, and they know exactly what they're selling you. And there's even just a kind of honesty about that. So this is kind of the conclusion section, I guess. And so I'm just going to fire off some big picture takeaways. The first thing is that I think musicians need to develop some clarity and consensus around what it is we're doing as workers on these platforms. Frankly, I think we need to understand that we are kind of in an arrangement right now as musicians on social media that is basically digital feudalism. We are renting the land that we are working on behalf of our kind of tech lords, of the kind of tech landlords out here. We learn their apps, we learn their algorithms, we bring traffic to them, we produce content for them that keeps people engaged, and then we are also expected to pay to promote things. We are also expected to continue to drive that traffic, regardless of kind of how much we get in return for that. We're expected to work and produce content and engagement on these social media platforms, regardless necessarily of the ways that we're given any kind of equity or stake or say-so in how these social media companies are run or how they treat us and benefit us in the long run. And there's a kind of historical trajectory to the ways that these social media apps tend to work. In the beginning, they offer a giant kind of digital expanse, a digital space that they say will be kind of horizontal. This is a place that's disruptive. It will democratize your ability to reach your people as long as you're willing to put in the work of creating good content and building community here. As long as you're bringing traffic and engagement here, you can find success. And so we as musicians, we do the work of driving traffic to those places, of finding our people, of creating content that keeps people engaged on those platforms where we're finding success. We build communities there. And then once we have kind of got our roots in that soul, then that digital commons starts to be enclosed upon. Then they start to say, oh, well, maybe this needs to be a sponsored post. Maybe you need to pay for this. Maybe we'll just kind of bump down your engagement a little bit so that you'll start to kind of pay for it. They begin to introduce subscriptions. They begin to suppress posts that are promoting the things that we built community around, the things that have basically become infrastructure for us, the things that are about promoting shows and new records and all of that. And then they begin to roll out new kind of apps for you to use, new ways of harvesting your data so that you can pay to promote and track the performance of those posts that they've started to suppress. Once again, by no means am I saying that TikTok is an anti-capitalist utopia. Not what I'm saying. But I do think that the entrance of TikTok into kind of major competition with these social media platforms does illuminate some alternative ways of working this kind of digital space. And I think in so doing, it suggests kind of a trajectory for what an exit from American digital serfdom might look like. One of my other big takeaways is, unfortunately, I think a little bit of a pessimistic warning about what it's going to be like to produce culture now that every major social media platform has bowed the knee to Trump. I think it's safe to say that social media companies and tech companies in general will continue to, or really just heighten the ways that they have catered to the interests of the state, of capitalism, of right-wing interests, of the cult of authoritarianism, of surveillance. We shouldn't be surprised if we begin to encounter audiences that are reflecting the values and norms of the environments that they're participating in. One of the ways that we tend to let capitalist mess off the hook is we say, oh, supply and demand. If people didn't want it, people wouldn't make it, without attending to the ways that these people that exert extraordinary political and economic power tend to make the consumers that they want to have. They have a lot of power in shaping the kind of subjects that participate in these social and cultural ecosystems that they've created. And so for musicians, you should always care to meet your audience with what you do, but we should also be thoughtful about what terms we're willing to meet our audience on, and to be aware of the ways that those terms may have shifted. What's normal, what feels like a middle ground to meet your audience, may actually not be that middle ground. It may be a lot farther right than you thought. Look, I can't stand an art bro who's like, I don't care about my audience. No, you always have a responsibility to meet your audience and care for them in some way or another. But at the same time, we also need to be understanding of the fact that what might have been the kind of middle meeting point with our audience might be shifting rightward. And so we have to be really thoughtful about what it means to meet people where they're at, and what compromises might be expected of us, and how we might want to deftly ask people to move farther away from that kind of rightward shift. And then lastly, I think there's a kind of punch list of things that musicians should advocate for when they have any kind of say in how social media platforms are evolving. Now, I don't think we'll ever have much say, but these are things I think we should advocate for. First, musicians should advocate for digital spaces where engagement is driven by connection, by finding your people, by collaboration, not by antagonism, by outrage. And these should be spaces where there are specific anti-harassment, anti-bullying policies put in place. Second, we want digital spaces that are culturally rich, where there's a kind of culture of taste making, a culture of contextualizing the things that we're doing within the terms of history and art and culture that we're working in, so that we're not contextualizing ourselves based on the brand that we're presenting so much as the cultural conversations and discourses that we're contributing to. Third, musicians should be treated as workers who produce content for these platforms. And so that means that there should be compensation, not just monetarily, but there should also be concerning care given to the ways that musicians need to build careers and success that translates outside of just success on the platform, translates into success at shows, success in record sales, success in streams, success in following outside of just the silo of one digital platform. We should also advocate for digital experiences where audio can be a driver of content just as much as anything that is visual, where audio isn't there to be a kind of secondary effect. It's not there to just be a soundtrack or a bunch of sound effects to the visual experience, but like TikTok, it's something that can actually drive the user experience. Fifth, we should advocate for digital spaces where artists are encouraged to be idiosyncratic, to be improvisational, to be complex, to be people and not brands, where the art can be contextualized by the artist. This is becoming increasingly important as AI is encroaching upon cultural creation. It's becoming increasingly important that artists are given space to succeed in creating things that cannot be anticipated by AI, things that are always one step ahead of the cultural data set that AI runs off of. This means that artists need to be given space to represent their work and to succeed and be rewarded for creating things that are increasingly idiosyncratic, contradictory, autobiographical, things that represent their singularity as people and not their predictability as content creators. Lastly, no more pay to play. No more enclosure on the communities that we've created and that we've brought to these spaces, and on the ways that we have built infrastructure in these places. I'm not even talking about payola to get your song listened to anymore. We're talking about payola just to get a show announcement out there. We should be done with all that. Anyway, y'all, this is my first long form video. Thanks for this. We're still working it out, still ironing out some kinks, but don't want to iron out all them kinks, you know what I mean? So anyway, if you like this, really do please tell somebody. Please follow, please subscribe, all that annoying stuff. I say that because it's a lot of work, and I'd like to get compensated at some point. Okay, be good to your people.